China just built an entire city inside one building. 30,000 people. China just built an entire city inside one building, where 30,000 people live under one roof. That is bigger than many towns. You heard that right. And that is just the beginning, because the real story is not the size. It is why people actually want to live here. If that already sounds impossible, hit a quick like and subscribe. By the end, you will understand how this happened. The six-star dream that collapsed. Before this became the building the internet could not stop staring at, you have to picture what it was supposed to be. Not a cheap apartment block, not a crowded vertical neighborhood, not a strange viral symbol of modern city life. It was supposed to be a six-star luxury hotel. You were supposed to walk into Regent International and feel like you had entered a palace in the sky. Marble floors, huge ceilings, polished surfaces. A lobby built to impress people who arrived with luggage, not laundry baskets. The kind of place where every corner is designed to whisper one thing: you are not an ordinary guest here. And that is what makes the story so strange. Because today, the people walking through that same grand entrance are not international elites checking into luxury suites. They are students, young professionals, freelancers, small business owners, and content creators coming home after work. They are not paying luxury hotel prices. Some are paying around $220 a month. That is less than what many people in major Western cities pay just to keep a gym membership, a phone plan, and a few streaming subscriptions alive. And for that, they are living inside the central business district of Hangzhou, one of China's most economically important cities. Here is what most people get wrong. They think this building was designed from the beginning as a dystopian experiment. As if someone sat down one day and said, "Let's put an entire town inside one tower and see what happens." But that is not how it began. Regent International opened in 2013, in the same decade when China's cities were expanding so fast that skylines seemed to change between one visit and the next. The building was created by architect Alicia Liu, widely linked to the design team behind Singapore's Marina Bay Sands, one of the most famous hotel structures in Asia. The plan was bold. The ambition was expensive. The image was clear. Hangzhou was going to get a luxury landmark. But buildings are not only made of concrete and glass, they are made of economics, and economics changed. A luxury hotel only works if the right people keep coming through the doors. Business travelers, wealthy tourists, conference guests, people who can fill expensive rooms every night. But when that version of the project no longer made sense, the building did something almost no one expected. It changed roles. Think of it like buying a giant wedding cake, then realizing no wedding is coming. You could throw it away, or you could cut it into hundreds of smaller pieces and feed an entire crowd. That is what happened here. The hotel rooms became apartments. The building that was meant to serve a small number of wealthy guests became a home for thousands of ordinary residents. The luxury shell stayed. The social purpose changed completely. And that is why Regent International feels so unreal. You get this strange collision between two worlds that were never supposed to meet. On the outside, it still carries the language of high-end hospitality. Inside, it has become one of the most intense answers to urban affordability anywhere on Earth. You walk through a lobby that looks like it belongs to a resort. Then you take an elevator to a compact apartment where someone is cooking noodles, editing videos, studying for exams, or sleeping before another long shift in the city. That contrast is the first real secret of the building. It was not born as a solution for the housing crisis. It became one because the original dream failed. And sometimes, that is how the future arrives. Not as a clean invention, not as a perfect plan, but as a mistake that turns out to solve a problem everyone else was ignoring. But the failed hotel is only the shell. The next chapter is bigger, because the real question is how a building this massive can stand, breathe, and hold a city-sized population without tearing itself apart. Why it looks like a building from the future. At first, Regent International does not look like a normal apartment tower. It curves, it bends, it stretches across the skyline in this strange shape, almost like someone took a massive building and gently twisted it before setting it down. From a distance, it looks futuristic. Online, that shape became part of the fascination, because it made the building feel less like housing and more like something from a science fiction city. But the shape is not just there to look dramatic. When you build something this large, the wind becomes one of your biggest enemies. A normal person feels wind as air moving past their face. A building feels wind as pressure, pushing against its sides for hours, days, and years. The taller and wider the structure becomes, the more that pressure matters, because the building is no longer just standing there. It is constantly being tested. Think of a cardboard box in front of a fan. If the flat side faces the air directly, the wind hits it hard and pushes against the whole surface at once. But if the shape is curved or broken up, the air has less of one clean target. That is the basic idea here. Regent International's shape helps break up those forces, so the wind does not slam into one giant rectangular wall. Here is the detail most people miss. This building is not only tall, it is wide, dense, and filled with people. It rises across 39 interconnected floors. That is like stacking almost 4 10-story buildings on top of one another, then connecting them into one massive living system. If the structure were shaped like a simple box, the pressure would be more brutal, the load would be less graceful, and the design would feel far more punishing inside. The curve helps spread stress across the building more efficiently. It also changes the way people live inside it. In a huge rectangular block, many apartments can end up buried deep inside the structure, facing dark internal shafts or narrow voids. But with the shape, more units can face outward. More residents can get some access to natural light, some view of the outside, and some reminder that the world does not end at their hallway. And that matters more than it sounds. When you are talking about 30,000 residents, you are talking about a population larger than many small towns living in one address. Every design choice suddenly becomes multiplied. A hallway is not just a hallway, it becomes a street. An elevator bank is not just an elevator bank, it becomes a public transit system. A window is not just a window, it becomes the difference between feeling housed and feeling sealed away. Now, here is where the building becomes more uncomfortable. The same design that makes it possible also makes it feel overwhelming. Because when you look at Regent International from the outside, you are not only seeing architecture, you are seeing an attempt to compress urban life into a single structure. The curve may solve a physical problem, but it also creates a psychological one. You start asking what happens when a building stops being a building. You can admire the engineering and still feel uneasy about the result. That is what makes Regent International so hard to categorize. It is not a failed idea. It is not a perfect idea. It is a structure that answers one problem so aggressively that it creates new questions around it. How much density can people tolerate? How much convenience is too much? And when does efficient housing begin to feel like a machine for living? That is the payoff of the shape. It is not just a visual gimmick. It is the reason the building can hold its scale, spread its forces, and give more apartments access to the outside world. But the shape only explains how the shell works. The next chapter is bigger, because once you step inside, you realize the building is not just holding apartments, it is holding an entire city routine. The city you never have to leave. Step inside Regent International, and the strangest part is not that people live there, it is how much of ordinary life has been pulled indoors with them. You are not walking into a simple apartment tower where the lobby leads to elevators and the elevators lead to rooms. You are walking into a stacked neighborhood where the same building that holds your bed can also hold your breakfast, your workout, your groceries, and your errands. That is what makes the building feel less like a residence and more like a city compressed into a vertical routine. Inside, residents can find supermarkets, restaurants, food courts, gyms, swimming pools, hair salons, nail salons, internet cafes, schools, and even a clinic. Not just a few basic shops. We are talking about the small pieces of daily life, then the useful services, then the kind of places that normally require you to cross streets, take buses, or plan your day around traffic. Picture your apartment building as a giant kitchen drawer. In a normal drawer, you keep one thing in one place. A spoon here, a knife there, maybe a few random tools thrown in. But Regent International works more like the whole kitchen folded into the drawer. You open one space, and suddenly everything you need is stacked inside it. That is the simple idea behind the building's internal ecosystem. Here is the part that makes people pause. A resident can wake up, take an elevator, work out, buy breakfast, grab groceries, get a haircut, visit a clinic, eat dinner, and go back home without stepping through a door that leads outside. In most cities, that routine would spread across several blocks. Here, it can happen inside one address. Convenience is no longer around the corner. Convenience is inside the walls. At first, that sounds almost perfect. No rain ruining your commute, no long walk for food, no expensive ride, just to run an errand. No wasting half the day moving between places when all you wanted was a meal, a haircut, or a basic appointment. For a busy student or a young worker, the building can feel less like a cage and more like a shortcut through the chaos of city life. But the same feature that makes it convenient also makes it unsettling, because when everything you need is inside one building, the outside world becomes optional. You do not have to learn the streets around you. You do not have to build routines in the wider city. You can know your floor, your elevator, your favorite food stall, your closest shop, and almost nothing beyond the entrance. The building begins to replace the neighborhood. That is where the story becomes more complicated. A city normally forces you to mix with strangers in small, accidental ways. You pass shopkeepers, you wait at crossings, you hear street sounds. You notice seasons change. Inside Regent International, many of those random encounters become controlled, repeated, and internal. You still live around people, but you may experience the world through corridors, elevators, service counters, and glowing signs. And remember, this is happening at the scale of 30,000 residents. That is like placing the population of a small town inside one building and asking elevators, hallways, shops, and shared services to behave like roads, markets, sidewalks, and public squares. Suddenly, every ordinary system becomes loaded with pressure. A busy elevator is not just annoying, it is traffic. A crowded food court is not just lunch hour, it is urban density in miniature. So the payoff is not just that Regent International has shops inside. Many buildings have shops. The payoff is that this one turns daily life into an indoor circuit. It gives residents a version of the city that is cheaper, faster, and closer than the city outside. But it also asks a harder question. If you can live without leaving, how long before the building stops serving your life and starts becoming the boundary of it? And that is why the next chapter matters even more. Because a building this self-contained would mean nothing if people were trapped there unwillingly. But the shocking part is that many people are trying to get in. The people who actually want to live here. Now, this is where the viral story starts to break. Because if you only saw Regent International through short clips online, you might imagine the residents as people trapped inside some cold experiment. You picture tiny rooms, endless corridors, artificial lights, and a building so packed that nobody would choose it unless they had no other option. But when you look closer, the stranger truth is that many people actually want to live here. That does not mean the building is perfect. It means the alternative is worse. In Hangzhou, living close to work, transport, food, and opportunity can be expensive enough to push young people far from the center. So when someone finds a room for around $220 a month, that number lands differently. It is less than what many people in global cities spend on coffee, internet, and small subscriptions combined. Here is what most people get wrong. They compare Regent International to a comfortable suburban apartment, then decide it looks depressing. But the residents are not comparing it to a spacious home with a garden. They are comparing it to long commutes, higher rents, shared rooms in worse locations, and the constant feeling that the city wants their labor, but not their presence. In that comparison, the building starts to look less bizarre. For a young graduate, this can be the difference between surviving in the city and giving up on it. You can live near the jobs. You can stay close to the business district. You can keep more of your income instead of handing it to a landlord every month. And when you are trying to build a life, that matters. Not in a glamorous way, in a very practical, very human way. Think of it like a crowded backpack. It is not the bag you would choose for a luxury trip. It is tight, heavy, and not always comfortable. But if it lets you carry everything you need while moving through a difficult place, you keep using it. Regent International works like that for many residents. It may not be anyone's dream home, but it can be the tool that makes the city possible. And this is why the waitlist matters. A building does not develop demand because the internet finds it creepy. It develops demand because people look at their choices and decide the trade-off is worth it. They are not choosing a fantasy, they are choosing access. Access to work, food, transport, services, and a location that would normally belong to people with far more money. That is the uncomfortable part. Because once you understand that, the building stops looking like a random Chinese oddity. It starts looking like a mirror. It shows you what happens when cities become so expensive that people accept smaller rooms, denser buildings, and less privacy just to remain close to opportunity. The real story is not that people are willing to live strangely. The real story is that modern cities keep making ordinary living feel like a luxury product. So the payoff of this chapter is not that Regent International is secretly paradise. It is that demand itself tells a story. If people are lining up to live in a place the internet calls dystopian, then maybe the building is not the weirdest part. Maybe the weirdest part is a housing market, where this becomes one of the most rational choices available. But even that does not explain why Regent International had to exist in Hangzhou specifically, and the next chapter is bigger, because once you look at the city around it, the building stops feeling unusual and starts feeling inevitable. The pressure that built this place. To understand why Regent International exists, you have to stop looking at the building first. Look at the city around it. Hangzhou is not some forgotten place where strange housing experiments happen in the background. It is one of China's most important tech cities, home to Alibaba, and a magnet for graduates, workers, entrepreneurs, and young people trying to get close to opportunity before it moves somewhere else. Now zoom out even further. China moved hundreds of millions of people into cities in less than 80 years. That is like relocating more than the entire population of the United States, from villages and rural regions into urban life within one historical breath. When that many people move toward jobs, schools, hospitals, transit, and money, housing does not become a side issue. Housing becomes the pressure point under everything. Here is the detail that puts everything into perspective. Hangzhou did not only become more desirable, it became harder to afford at the exact same time. The better the city became for work, the more expensive it became to simply exist near that work. That is the trap modern cities keep creating. They invite young workers in, then quietly push them farther and farther away from the center. Think of the city like a crowded table with too few chairs. Everyone can see the meal. Everyone wants a place. But when the chairs are limited, the people with the most money sit first, and everyone else has to stand, squeeze, or leave. Regent International became one of those extra chairs. Not elegant, not spacious, but available, central, and close enough to the table to matter. And this is where the building stops looking bizarre. A room around $220 a month is not just cheap rent, it is an entry ticket. It lets someone stay near the business district instead of losing hours to commuting. It lets a freelancer, graduate, or young employee remain inside the city's economic bloodstream. If that surprised you, the next part is going to be even harder to believe. Hit subscribe so you are there when we cover it. So the payoff is simple. Regent International did not become famous because it was strange. It became famous because it answered a question Hangzhou was already asking. Where do you put the people a city needs when the city itself has become too expensive for them? But every answer has a cost, and the next chapter is bigger because this building solution also creates some of its darkest problems. The dark side of vertical living. But this is where the story has to slow down. Because affordability does not erase discomfort. Inside Regent International, some of the cheapest rooms are windowless. Around $220 a month can place you in Hangzhou's business district, but it can also mean waking up, eating, working, and sleeping under artificial light. That is not a small detail. That is your whole sense of day and night being filtered through a ceiling bulb. Here is the brutal catch. When a building becomes this self-contained, convenience can slowly turn into isolation. You may know the elevator route better than the street outside. You may recognize the food stall worker, the neighbor on your floor, the sound of your hallway, but still feel disconnected from the actual city. It is like living inside a shopping mall after closing time. Everything is there, but something human feels missing. Then there is the question nobody can ignore. What happens in a serious emergency? 30,000 people live under one roof. That is more than many small towns trying to move through shared corridors, elevator banks, stairwells, internal bridges, and exits at once. Even if safety systems exist, the thought alone changes how you see the building. A fire drill is not just a drill here, it is a city-scale movement problem. Inequality does not vanish because everyone shares one address. It simply becomes vertical. Cheaper rooms can mean less light, more noise, less privacy, and fewer choices. Better spaces still belong to those who can pay more. So, Regent International solves one problem, but exposes another. It brings people closer to the city, then charges them in sunlight, space, and peace. And the next chapter is bigger, because Western cities may be running out of gentler answers. The building Western cities don't want to admit they need. And this is where Regent International stops being a strange story from China and starts becoming a warning to everyone else. Because New York, London, Toronto, Sydney, Singapore, and dozens of other major cities have done many things right. They built opportunity, jobs, culture, universities, finance, and global influence. But they also created a painful contradiction. The better these cities became, the harder it became for normal people to live inside them. Here is what makes this so uncomfortable. A one-bedroom apartment in New York has cost $4,000 a month in many areas. That is nearly 20 times the $220 rooms people talk about inside Regent International. You may hate the trade-offs in this building, but you cannot ignore the math. Western cities keep saying density is too extreme. Then watch nurses, teachers, graduates, artists, and workers get priced out anyway. So, maybe Regent International is not the future anyone dreams of. Maybe it is the future cities create when they refuse to build enough of anything else. It is not a perfect answer. It is a brutal answer. But at least it is an answer. If this changed how you think about housing, hit like and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now tell me in the comments, is Regent International dystopian, or is it more honest than the cities pretending their housing crisis can be solved gently?